You are now live.
Okay, we're live. So, all right, you got that down? Okay, we are live and Ledge Council is here. I apologize for the late start, but this is the time of year where attorneys are in short supply. So I'm going between two areas at once. And so David, you're with us. And I've also got Ellen down, so I don't know what part of this bill you did, how it's divided up. But if you can walk us through part of it, then we can go on with the other testimony. We're assuming that Ellen is probably on the House floor because they're taking up a pretty heavy duty agenda this afternoon. So the floor is yours, David.
Yep.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, David Hall, Legislative Counsel. I had sent to Faith a summary table for this bill that we could work from if you would prefer. It's up to you.
Okay, that might be helpful. We just got copies. All right. Faith, I don't think the summary table made its way here.
David, I don't have the summary table. I apologize. Would you like to share your screen and I will get it posted while you do that?
I can do that. I will email it to the committee as well. I just emailed it, and
Thank you.
I'm happy to share my screen.
That would be good.
Okay, so here's that.
Okay, and you need to make it just somewhat bigger.
How does that look?
Good. I think.
Well, so Ellen is on the House floor and the first 6 sections are hers, but I'm not sure that they are too much of a worry for you as far as finance specific issues. They all relate to changes in Title 24 and 10. Basically, they're land use provisions concerning zoning in Act 250. You're going to have to, you can read the summary if you want to know in a nutshell what's going on here. But, you know, for more details, you're going to have to turn to her, I'm afraid. So there's that. Section 7, first generation home buyers. I'll just tell you, you're probably aware that the down payment assistance program is a thing that exists within VHFA. They are allowed a certain amount of tax credit allocations every year to sell into the market to raise a pool of funds. And then there's a program through which they can extend loans for down payment assistance and closing costs. And those loans are repayable upon sale or transfer of the property. What this addition in Section 7 does is, it's a very short addition, but it says that VHFA has the authority to make some of its financial assistance in the form of grants to first-time home buyers who are also first-generation home buyers. So it does not change the financial implications of the program to the extent that it increases the amount of the program. It does, though, change the form of the assistance. And again, it would allow grants in some cases instead of loans, which means that obviously any money that's granted out would not revolve in the same way that a loan would. So there's the financial implication there.
Okay, you want to define first generation?
It is not defined in the bill, and presumably it would be up to VHFA to, you know, put the final shape on it. But I think the intention has always been that it is the first person in your family to own a home.
So my great grandfather owned a farm it went belly up and we haven't owned any for 3 years. I think there are 3 generations. I think we might need to either tighten that up a little bit or we'll talk tomorrow. Okay. Let's see other questions. You can keep going.
All right. Section 8, the Manufactured Home Relocation Incentive Program is an ARPA appropriation for grants for various purposes for manufactured homes. You'll see in the summary here, there's a pot for small scale capital grants. There's a small for home, a pool for home repair grants and a pool for foundation grants. But those are ARPA appropriations.
Okay.
Section 9, the Affordable Housing Tax Credit for manufactured housing. This is
here. Okay.
So this does increase the annual allocation of the Affordable Housing Tax Credit from $425,000 annually to $675,000, and then it specifies that $250,000 of those monies shall be used for manufactured housing purchase and replacement.
Is this the section that was in 437, Michael?
Yes, and that's 101 as well.
Okay.
Everywhere.
Keeps coming
Don't
down.
suspect it.
What's 250,000 shall be used for manufactured housing purchase and replacement. So if I remember, those cost about 50 grand. So if I'm why mobile homes, what's going on?
There's a multiplier effect. This is the thing we dealt with. We put 250,000 in the first year. It keeps replicating for
Yeah.
5 years forward until ultimately there's an increase of 1.25 million over that period. I think we were talking about last year something like 50 homes or 65 homes or something.
Over the period.
Okay.
There's a lot more money for mobile homes above that.
Yeah, I was just looking at the actual bill.
All right. Section 10, I think we can go on to.
Sure. So section 10 is really an authorization to VHCB to devote up to $5 million of its funding for 3 different purposes. One is the commercial property conversion. Another is matching grants for large employer housing. And the third is part of a multi-agency neighborhood development plan, which there's other details there, but basically for coordinating and funding neighborhood developments among multiple, with participation by municipalities and multiple agencies and departments within state government.
Okay. So far, all I've seen in our jurisdiction is that tax credit.
The 2 of them, I guess. I mean, section 7 and section 9.
9 is a tax credit. Okay. That's right. That was a tax credit when we did it. All right.
Section 11 through 13 are not tax credits. They are, this relates to the Municipal Bylaw Modernization Grant Program. And it's both an appropriation and a statutory set of changes to authorize how those grants are used. Any questions on that one?
No.
Okay, well, sections 14 through 20 are all tax credits. And I gotta tell you
that
that
goes out of here today. So I gotta keep score because this is money this is money that's gonna come out of available revenues. And I hear the budgets are already underwater, so.
Wait, can I ask, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Mike, David, sorry. Did you do section 11 yet?
yes,
You said they're grants, but they are from revenue from the property transfer tax, right?
looks like Ellen's here and just in time, because these are all her sections.
Oh, these are all her section, okay.
Okay, why don't we let Michael finish up his and then we'll go back with Alan. David. I'm writing down, okay, so we're doing tax credits. So far, I'll ask Michael, we've done 200,000 in the first instance, right? You increase it from 425 to 675,
Correct,
for 250?
right.
Can,
Okay,
Section 7 is not a financial impact one way or another, except on.
Michael, I can't hear you.
It's, if you're looking to keep track, the first one does not affect the revenues of the state. It does down the road potentially impact how much is left over in the revolving. loan fund.
Okay, that's out of the revolving loan fund. All right, let's go back down to the next bunch of sections that do tax credits. Okay, now we're back up at 11. Can we go?
To 14.
Yeah, all right, we're at 14, that's it. 5 million,
wait, Madam Chair, I'm trying to follow along with the sections in the bill, so it can take me a little time. So we're on section 14 now, you'd like us to talk about?
11, he said was Ellen, so I wanted to go through
Got it.
David's, and then we'll go to Ellen, because she's just arrived.
Well, so if you just want to stick with me and let me finish
Yeah.
up my part, then you're actually going to jump down to section 24.
That's where I thought we were, all right.
So section 24, not a tax credit. This is this is $15 million in appropriations. And it's a subsidy program through VHFA to provide funding to develop quote unquote missing middle housing. And I mean, there's a lot of detail, but that's the thrust of that one.
Okay,
Sections 25 through 30 should look familiar. It creates a registration and certification framework in OPR for residential construction contractors. And I suppose there is still a nexus to finance. There are, of course, registration fees, as there were in the bill in which this first appeared.
what are you thinking? Oh, okay,
I'm sorry.
Any questions on 25 through 30?
Hold on. I'm still trying to catch
Yeah,
up on
this is
24.
confusing.
so 24, that's an appropriation of 15 million to VHFA. Right?
Yes.
All right, and we create a program that would be subsidies for new middle income affordable housing. That's Mark, he just came in and went back up.
So section 25 looks like it's just findings.
25 is, and then 26 through 30 implement the residential contractors program in OPR.
Okay.
This,
Yeah.
exactly the same as what we passed earlier, or?
It is not exactly the same because the dollar thresholds for registration and for the written contract requirement have increased to $5,000.
What were they originally?
3,500.
Well, I mean, originally is the bill that you passed, there were 3,500.
Okay, and that's the bill that got vetoed, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we raised the threshold and we've put that back in here.
And there's a fee.
And there is a fee. What's the fee?
I'd have to,
It's the insurance requirement.
Yeah, but there is in terms of our needs,
Yeah.
page 40, there's fees of $75, 200.
Okay. Okay. All right, so we've got fees on page 40, okay. And OPR, all right, let's, 31, what have we got there?
so, basically, the changes in 31 and 32 are contingent changes to S210 as you have passed it, and specifically within the Vermont Rental Housing Investment Program. And what these two sections here would do would be to allow the creation of ADUs within that program, if it becomes law, would be able to avail themselves of grants up to $50,000 for the conversion or creation of ADUs. And then the other part of the section 32 says that of the amounts that are appropriated to that program in S210, DHCD would use up to 20% of that funding to assist homeowners in the creation of ADUs.
And
So,
this is those ancillary units, we used to call them mother-in-law apartments.
Exactly.
Are
Accessory
these,
dwelling unit.
okay, an accessory dwelling unit. So
Yep.
this would let me add a wing on the back of my house to rent out to the public? Is that what we're thinking now, not my mother-in-law?
Well, they aren't, the only way that they're restricted here is that they cannot be used for short-term rentals.
Yeah.
But they're already allowed in law. And it started out, like a long history with this, where it was just your relatives, but that changed over time.
That's what I thought.
A while ago. So we're not changing the law in that respect at all. And there was some talk about whether we would continue to require that the people developing these ADUs be owner occupied or not. And that was pretty controversial, and just left the law as is. So it still has to be owner occupied to qualify for this program or to build.
Okay, so to get the loan, they have to be not doing short-term
Well, to
rental.
get a permit also, existing law, you have to be owner occupied. Under existing law.
To do an Airbnb?
No,
No, the
construct-
accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah, the constructed
so
attachment.
you could do that as an Airbnb, but if you wanted the grant.
Say again?
There's nothing that prevents me from, if I'm allowed to build an ADU, I could put it on Airbnb. But
Right,
if,
under present law, you could, yeah, this
Yeah.
doesn't change that.
but
Except this, what this does, if you take state money,
You
you can.
And this talks about 25% of the 20 million goes to ADUs. What happens with the other 15 million?
That's the VHIP program, which is conversion of substandard housing to rental units.
Okay,
An ADU, people say stuff like, oh, I built an apartment over the garage, but can it be a brand new, entirely separate new structure on your property?
I think it can, but it has size restrictions.
Okay.
It has to be like no more than 900 square feet.
okay, but it does have to meet local zoning setback.
Yes,
Okay. Okay. So. All right, so we've done 32, right? Which is where the rest of the money is going? All right,
Now, section 32 is, so section 30, where's the 25%?
It's got 20% or of the
There's something that says
DRHIP funding
25%.
goes to assist homeowners.
25% for ADUs and then 20% of the 25% for.
I'm trying to find 25% in this chart. Does it say it anywhere there?
Yeah, not on that chart, but it says that in the language.
Okay, yeah. So there's $20 million, 25% is $5 million goes to ADUs, which are part of this program already. We're just saying, give them that carve out. And then 20% of the $5 million is $1 million goes for other assistance that is not financial assistance. It's very important to us in terms of constructing these ADUs, and we have a lot of hand holding. And you can find a navigator that can take you through the process, the permitting process, the financing, all this stuff. So we put $1 million for regional people to help average citizens build an ADU.
Okay.
That's where
That seems like a lot of money, $1 million.
it's important to get people.
Okay, who are the regional people?
I think that's you could ask Chris Cochran, I think we left that to be
All
determined.
right, so Chris,
by the
we're gonna hear
department.
from Chris. Okay, so David, that gets us to the end, or do you just need to flip down your screen some more?
Oh, that's it for me. And that's the end of the bill. And then that puts you back in Ellen land.
And Ellen land, okay. So Ellen, walk us through your sections.
Sure. Do you want me to put the chart back up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I handle Act 250 and municipal zoning, as I think you all are aware. So the sections in this bill that relate to that are what I have drafted. So let me zoom in for you here. So the first sections 1 through 6, these are pieces of language that relate to amendments to municipal zoning as well as Act 250. You heard about some of them yesterday in S234. None of them have direct money impacts. So I don't know, did you want to hear the overview of them or just go to the money sections?
I would love to have an overview, just so I know what's in the bill.
Sure. So this first page of the summary chart is what I walked you through yesterday in S234, the Act 250 bill. So section 1 is a finding section related to housing. Section 2 amends 2793E in Title 24, which is the statute that sets the requirements for designated neighborhood development areas. It changes some of the requirements for a town to achieve a NDA designation. It allows for towns to file joint applications for NDAs. It includes flood hazard areas in NDAs. That is a change if they are suitable for infill development as defined in A&R's rules. If they do have flood hazard areas, the local bylaws have to adopt flood hazard area bylaws consistent with A&R's model bylaws for flood hazard area protection. It also strikes the requirement that an NDA have a municipal wastewater sewer infrastructure.
Can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes.
I think you touched on this yesterday, but I still just cannot wrap my head around this. Why are we authorizing the building of housing in flood hazard areas? Aren't they trying to move houses away from flood areas?
So I would just say that this bill is not authorizing the construction of housing in flood hazard areas. That is something that is already allowed in statute as long as a builder gets the proper permits and meets A&R's existing standards related to that. They can already do that. What's happening in this bill is that they're being added to areas in the neighborhood development area, which means that they will be areas that are now eligible for incentives. There are a number of incentives available to NDAs, and a few of them are actually amended and expanded in this bill. So if anything, it would be incentivizing construction within the flood hazard areas, but it's not such a significant change that allowing something that wasn't already allowed. It's extending incentives to these areas now.
Okay, so it's incentivizing building houses in flood areas. That just seems crazy to me. I don't,
It's counterintuitive.
it's totally counterintuitive, so
Yeah, what's going on,
It's in your bill too.
yeah.
It's because it's not just any flood area, it's flood areas that are protected and governed by codes that make sure that there is not added flooding as a result. And some of the incentives is to improve those areas in terms of flood protection.
They have, ANR has new codes related, new laws, rules around construction in floodplains, floodways. And so it includes things like hardening of structures, and they do a whole geofluvial analysis, like to make sure they're not accelerating rivers by eliminating, filling in spaces. And then there's also things that go to hardening existing structures to make them more resilient in that same space. So it does sound, face of it, counterintuitive. Based on their new rules, they actually are quite confident that they're not doing anything adverse, that it would have any adverse impacts when a flood does occur. And that the buildings constructed will be constructed in such a way as to be much more flood resistant.
I'm still skeptical. I mean, is there money in the bill to move housing out of floodplains? Because I know, for example, in Huntington, they're looking for money to help move houses out.
Could we flag this one, because it's worth discussion, and let Ellen Cruz.
Sure.
And then
Sure.
back to this.
The short answer is it's traditional,
Okay.
traditional settlement pattern.
One section, two, halfway through two. Okay, Ellen.
That's what towns form.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so still within the NDA requirement statute, it's striking the requirement that NDAs have either municipal sewer or an approved alternative wastewater system. It then also amends the required densities required for an NDA to be 4 residential units of any kind. Section 3 uses that nearly identical language in the new town center designation program, clarifying that new town centers must have a density of at least 4 residential units within any of its zoning districts. Section 4 states that site plan permits or conditional use permits shall not expire in less than 2 years. So that's creating just that currently there's no deadline. So towns have a variety of lengths of time that they use. Section 5 is an Act 250 amendment. As I mentioned yesterday, currently priority housing projects are exempt from Act 250. There are a number of criteria that need to be met in order for a project to be a priority housing project. Currently in the smallest towns, only up to 25 units of housing are exempt from Act 250. This is raising that cap to 50 units. So in towns with 6,000 people or less, up to 50 units of housing, priority housing projects can be exempt from Act 250. It also has a technical correction to fix the definition of mixed income housing to match the definition that VHFA uses. In addition, it expands the definition of priority housing projects so that priority housing projects in neighborhood development areas can now include mixed use projects instead of just only housing projects. And then Section 6 amends the exemption section of Act 250 related to priority housing projects and just clarifies that or changes that no permit or permit amendment is required for a priority housing project. Question?
Here's another question.
Ellen, in recent years, we've looked at this similar language, and I think I was part of a crew that's successfully, in one case anyway, had an amendment to make it clear that these buildings, these housing units that are exempt from Act 250 now, newly exempted, would still have to have the stretch codes. So type buildings, that code applied. Is that in here?
Yes, that hasn't been changed.
Still applies, but it's not shown in the bill, this is still applied.
Because we applied it somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so this bill really just expands the definition of priority housing project. It doesn't restrict it in any way like that.
Thank you.
All right, so that's the end of the municipal zoning and Act 250 changes.
Okay.
Sections 11 through 13 then create the Municipal Bylaw Modernization Grant Program. So this is a new grant program. It builds on an existing program that's in statute in 24 VSA 4306. That statute establishes the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund, which is a pot of money that exists for regional planning and municipal planning. And those funds come from the property transfer tax. And it's pretty broad currently what those grants can be used for, just as long as they're for planning. So section 12 adds a new type of grant that is part of the municipal planning grant fund now. And it's for bylaw modernization. And there is language in section 12 that spells out exactly what is meant by bylaw modernization. It's largely to increase density and housing opportunity and affordability and choice in areas of towns. So towns will apply for a grant to update their bylaws to do these things to increase density and housing choices. And so there's language around that. And there is an appropriation for $650,000 to the Municipal Bylaw Grant Program. But I think this might technically be in your jurisdiction because this is an existing grant program and it's adding a new type of grant. And this grant program is funded by the property transfer tax. Okay. No questions on that?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. So then the other big section of this bill that is related to your area are the tax credits, the downtown and village center tax credit program. So this bill makes a few different changes to that program. First, as you probably remember, the downtown tax credit program has a cap on the amount of tax credits that can be awarded yearly. That cap is currently $3 million. I believe you raised it to $3 million last year. This bill proposes to raise it to $5 million. And of that $5 million, up to $1 million of tax credits can be used for projects in neighborhood development areas. So that's one of the other changes. Currently, the tax credits are only available for buildings in downtowns or village centers. And this is adding neighborhood development areas as another area that can receive tax credits.
Okay.
In addition, it also adds a new type of tax credit called a flood mitigation tax credit. So currently under the program, there are 3 existing types of tax credits for different types of projects. They're for code improvement, facade improvement, or for building rehabilitation. So this is adding another type of project eligible for tax credits, and that's for flood mitigation projects.
Okay, where is that? Well, here it is, qualified flood mitigation. So that's on page 23, but that's not, I thought we'd done that.
You have seen this language before. It was in S101 last year, and that's the bill that it was passed last biennium by the Senate, but never made it fully across the finish line.
Okay.
So you did work on this last year.
I thought that sounded familiar, okay. Okay. All right, so far, we're upping $2 million in the downtown tax credits and then saying that they can be up to $1 million can go into neighborhood development areas. And we're doing the same that you can also use this money for flood mitigation. I think that's it, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just can't get over this flood thing. So this is, paragraph 6 on page 23, that the qualified flood mitigation project, these are two existing buildings, yeah? Or you're
Yes.
not allowing to use these tax credit to build new buildings, right?
Correct. And they're for older buildings.
For
They
older.
have to be at least 30 years old.
Okay, that sounds familiar. Okay. All right, I just I feel like I don't want to double and triple down on things in floodplains.
Right, so Senator Hardy, I do think it's fair to point out here in relation to your first question. So NDAs are being added to this tax credit program. In the first few sections of the bill, NDAs were being expanded to now include flood hazard areas. So now those areas are eligible for this incentive if you were to pass these tax credit sections. And those areas would be eligible for the priority housing project exemption that I mentioned in the Act 250 sections as well.
But in that section, that's actually building new housing in flood.
Correct.
This is just fixing buildings that already exist there.
Correct.
Right, okay, so that's a difference. I mean, putting new things in floodplains makes me nervous, but.
Okay, no questions so far, let's move on.
All right, so I'm almost done with my sections. So then sections 21 and 22 should also sound familiar to you because they were in, I think, multiple prior bills. This section 21 would add an exemption from A&R's wastewater connection permit if the municipality issues a wastewater connection permit. And so then section 22 goes on to add some specific requirements on that to make sure that to put some requirements on what the municipality must do first. So if the municipality meets those requirements, projects in that town are exempt from needing an A&R wastewater connection permit.
Okay, and we've done that before. Well, I've been trying to do that for almost 25 years, but.
We've talked about it before.
We maybe haven't done.
No, we passed it out of the Senate.
Yeah, it was on the same bill last year as the, I guess it's S-101.
Yep.
Did it get vetoed
Yes.
last year or did it?
No,
No, I
that
didn't
was
make it.
Vetoed by the House.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
they didn't like,
It was a face.
Well, that was in one of your bills, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay,
that's why we undermined.
was this the one that got bounced around in Act 250 and ended up in here?
This language has been around in a few different bills.
I know I've seen it before, all right. Okay,
And then finally, section 23 is related to accessory dwelling units. This is amending language in Title 24 to prevent towns from requiring more than one parking space per bedroom for an accessory dwelling unit. As you talked about before, towns currently are not allowed to prohibit accessory dwelling units. However, they can put in their bylaws that there's a certain number of parking spaces required for an accessory dwelling unit. So this is putting a limitation on that.
I'm not required. Oh, all right, okay, not our jurisdiction. Parking? Zoning. Okay, committee, so far what I've got is the upping For the $2 million increase in the tax credits in section 14.
How did,
Um,
do we have any witnesses that'll tell us how, when we doubled
yes.
it just a moment ago, it went well, and now we need to?
Say that again.
Well, we doubled it a few years ago, and now we're.
Last year, the Senate upped it to 4,750,000, which the governor's request. This year, he's requesting $5 million, and we went along with that in our committee.
But
The
a few
downtown
years
tax
ago, it
credit.
was 1.5, and we made it 3 or something.
Mhm.
I don't know if we did it 1 year.
Are you asking about the downtown tax credits?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, if you give me one, I have that in my file somewhere. I don't know if Patrick has it closer, but I do have it in my file if you'll give me a minute.
It's okay, Ellen. I'm looking for people to tell us why we need to kind of continue the
Okay,
expansion, not
Right.
the history.
And remember, this is revenue we are not collecting, and it is essentially bank revenue, a few insurance companies. It's not
Yeah.
tax exemptions for downtown businesses, so.
Well, the banks buy them.
Buy the credits and then they
You're talking
apply
about the
them.
mechanics, but
Right.
the practical impact.
Yeah, it is a
relevant.
revenue loss. Because the banks without the credits would have paid the revenue to the state, yes.
Well, the project probably wouldn't have happened.
That's also-
the
I'm
testimony.
I'm not arguing that.
Okay.
I'm just saying that the people
Yeah.
across the hall,
No, it is definitely a revenue loss.
yes, are
They all
getting a little panicked this year on both sides of the body. Senator Sorokin.
I just would suggest an answer to a bunch of questions. It might be good to have Chris Cochran.
That's where I'm gonna go next.
Okay.
Okay?
so I have, Chris, Senator Pearson just got it, but
I've got you here. Do you have a time crunch? Can I go through the other witnesses and are you still available?
I'm all yours, Madam Chair.
Okay, then we're gonna go on to Chris Corcoran and Caitlin Corkins.
Ellen was trying to say something.
Oh, Ella.
I do have the numbers of how, so of the tax increase over the last 16 years, if that's information you want. But I don't know. I wasn't sure if that was, I have the numbers in front of me now if you would like them.
Sure, that would help.
Sure. So when the downtown tax credit program was created in 2006, it was set at $1.5 million. In 2007, it went up to 1.6 million. In 2009, it went up to 1.7 million. In 2014, so then there was a 5-year gap, it went up to 2.2 million. So it went up $500,000. In 2017, it was raised to 2.4 million. In 2019, it was raised to 2.6 million. And then in 2020, it was raised to 3 million.
Okay.
So yes, in the last 5 years, it's doubled.
Okay,
Are those cumulative or annual amounts?
annual.
Annual.
Annual, so 5 million annually is what this would do, okay,
Yeah,
that's a big chunk.
it's a big chunk.
So this would be
Okay.
the largest increase that has happened. It's been smaller increases in previous years.
Okay, so Chris and Caitlin, and I'm assuming you have a presentation together, so, okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Chris Cochran and Caitlin Corkins here from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. We had a larger slide presentation. We're going to just try to truncate it so we can catch up on time. This is a graph of revenues from income taxes. Not income taxes, sales taxes.
The sales and use.
Yes. And a lot of this, the big chunk of this is from online sales. And so it's terrific that you guys made changes several years ago to ensure that we collect sales taxes on online purchases. But many of these online purchases are coming at the expense of our downtowns. And I guess the point of
Okay,
trying
Chris,
to-
we're having a little trouble hearing you.
hearing me, all right. I will speak up
It's
louder.
a little bumpy, so maybe you could get closer to the mic.
All right, I think I'm just gonna stand up. How about that? Is that any better?
Yeah,
Okay. So these taxes have gone up a good bit during the pandemic, but our downtowns and village centers have suffered because they've lost a lot of retail sales. A lot of our restaurants are struggling because of this. And I put the slide up here just to make the point, our communities are suffering, and it would be terrific if we could use some of this surge to reinvest in our communities and help them bounce back from the pandemic. I'm going to switch quickly over to Caitlin Corkins, who's going to, I'm sorry, here's the next slide. This is our different types of designation, and I think this gets to Senator Pearson's question about why the increases are occurring. We have several different designations. Currently, right now, the village centers and downtowns are the only ones that are eligible for the downtown and village center tax credits. Makes sense. We have increased significantly the number of village centers. Every year, it's about 20 to 25 more village centers that become designated. This is a good thing because we want to help these communities. We want this program to help all over Vermont, but it does increase demand on the program because they have buildings that need to be improved. We have other designations that do other things. Newtown centers are helping communities without a center. And what this proposal is doing this year is, since we have such a terrific need for housing, especially in our compact centers where people want to live, it's proposing to expand the benefit area to the neighborhood development areas. And these are the areas around downtowns and village centers. When we designate a downtown or village center, we just designate the very small little core of the business district. The benefits don't accrue to the housing, but we have significant housing needs in and around those centers, and housing quality is a real challenge in many of our communities. I'm going to hand this over to Caitlin, and she's just going to kind of walk you through the downtown and village center tax credit program. And then I'm going to make a brief presentation on kind of the changes that we're proposing. I'd be happy to answer questions after that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Caitlin Corkins, Tax Credit and Grants Coordinator for the Department of Housing and Community Development, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here today with you folks. So as Chris mentioned, I'm just going to go quickly through sort of the basic high-level overview of the program as it exists today. It's now over 20 years old. As you just heard from Ellen, the program has been expanding. I think when it was the very first year that it was initiated, we had about $300,000 in funding annually, and today's cap is up to $3 million. This slide here shows a sort of snapshot of the past 5 years. You can see that we've funded projects to 128 projects in 62 different designated communities. Because this program is accessible, it's a state program, it's easy to use, it's often some of the first funding that goes into large and complex development projects in our communities, such as the New Avenue project in St. Johnsbury that you can see on the slide here. So the current program has 3 different types of credits that we offer, and this was sort of outlined earlier by Ellen. This slide just goes through those very quickly. We have a 10% credit for rehabilitation of historic buildings. This is tied to a similar federal program, and so to qualify for this tier of credits through the state program, an applicant has to also have applied to the federal program and have an approved application. For smaller scale projects, we also offer a 25% facade credit. And then we also have code credits at 50%. These are definitely the most popular credits that we offer through the program to help bring our older building stock up to current codes. This can include large investments, things like elevators and sprinkler systems, but also smaller things, just upgrades to electrical systems or a fire alarm, providing a new means of egress or making accessibility upgrades, that kind of thing. We try to collect data as much as we can to understand the program's impacts by surveying the participants of the program. And on this slide, I have some of those numbers that we've collected in the past 5 years, again, self-reported from users of the program. You can see jobs created, businesses created, businesses expanded. Overall, we received really positive feedback on this program. People appreciate that the tax credits are easy to apply for, that we keep the paperwork to a minimum. And so it's accessible even for folks that don't regularly apply for grants or public funding. I wanted to highlight just a few different projects that we funded recently to give you sort of an idea of some trends that we see for types of projects that are being funded through the program. The first is this redevelopment of a large office block in Burlington, which was converted into housing. As I mentioned, we see this as a real trend in many of our downtowns. In a post-COVID world, how do we continue to transform our downtowns and keep them vital? We know that downtowns are hurting. Chris alluded to that. From online retail and loss of foot traffic, as many people are now teleworking. At the same time, we know we have this huge housing crunch. So the tax credit program is poised to support this type of project that converts unused office space into housing on both a large scale in a community like Burlington, but also in smaller communities as well, where even 10 units of housing would make a really big difference. Another type of project that we have seen a lot in the past 5 years through this program is the general store, especially in smaller communities. These businesses play a huge commercial and community role. A general store is more than a place that you just pick up a cup of coffee in the morning. They really become the center of community for a lot of places in Vermont, a lot of smaller municipalities. But this is a tough business to be in, and many of these general stores are older buildings that need a lot of investment to keep them going and viable.
And I happen to know that building. What did you do for $417,000 and when?
So this project is not yet complete. The building is, they're actually still going through finalizing the plans for the construction. But the credits in this case will go to making code improvements that are required before the store can reopen, as well as making some facade improvements, particularly to that front entry porch. The building will end up being fully accessible, fully code compliant. And in addition to the general store itself, this building has 3 units of housing on the upper floor. Does that?
The house, and there's also a house attached to the back of it, right? Is that included?
Yes, there are apartment units in this building as well. It's a multi-use.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I tried to sell that for 5 years. I'm very familiar with it.
There you go. These are just a couple other general store projects. It's one of our favorites in communities around the state. East Calais, we just saw, Albany, Norwich. Each one of these projects is really a reflection of the community that it's in, and the tax credit funding was a key piece of the funding to support these community-supported enterprises. So the good news and the bad news is that this program is really popular and demand is high. So here are the numbers from our most recent round of funding, which was back in July. We had 1.5 million unfunded requests through the program. The downtown board that makes the funding decisions for us for the program have to make some really tough decisions every year. And there are unfortunately really good projects that we just cannot support because we don't have enough funding available. For those of you that like charts, I have a couple here just to reinforce this. It's a chronic issue for the program if you look back over the last 10 years. This chart shows the number of applications per year in the light green versus the applications funded in the dark green. In a majority of the past 10 years, we've funded less than half the applications that we receive. And then finally, if you
Talk about applications, that's not really applications for the tax credit, because those are sold to essentially banks and insurance companies. That's application for what is to the organization applying essentially free money, right? They get it as a grant. The tax credit goes to the institution that is buying the tax credit. Is that?
In some cases, yes. It depends. There are applicants that use the credit as a tax credit to offset their own tax liability. And then there are some, either they don't have enough tax liability to use the credit themselves, or if it's a nonprofit organization, obviously they don't pay state income tax. And so in that case, yes, they would be selling that credit to either a bank or an insurance company.
Yeah. Do you have a number about how many projects actually use the credits themselves and how many are sold to other institutions?
I don't have exact numbers for you. That is something I could certainly get.
Yeah, I had the impression that most of them were sold.
I would estimate somewhere around 50%, but I can get you the exact numbers.
Okay.
Go back to the past 5 years or something like that. We'd be happy to do that.
Okay, good, thank you. Senator Pearson.
Caitlin, could you just help me make sure I have this right? When we talk about them being sold,
Yes.
a bank has a big tax liability, and so is it? I'll just use the example. Do they pay somebody, a credit holder, $90 and get $100 worth of tax credit? Is that the basic construct?
Yeah, so typically when they're sold, they are bought at a slightly discounted rate. It's typically around 90 cents on the dollar, but as I tell all of my applicants, that is negotiable. So, you know, there are people that are getting 95 cents on the dollar for them. I think there have even been a few projects for nonprofits where the bank has bought them at 100% value. So it depends on the project, but yeah, roughly 90 cents on the dollar is what the sales price for these tax credits are.
Thanks.
So
Yep. Absolutely.
sorry, I'm standing up.
Yeah, Senator Harvey.
Well, maybe this is a question for later when we talk about, and we talked about this last year. If that's the case, which what Senator Pearson just reminded us, then why don't we just take $5 million of one-time funding and put it in, and then the projects would get $5 million instead of 4.5 million or 4.9 million or whatever.
That presumes there's 5 million in one time.
Yes,
And
certainly.
it's available, we could do that.
In most years, we don't have it, and so I understand in past years why we went the tax credit direction, but now we're gonna lose the revenue by making it a tax credit. So I don't know. There obviously banks like it, but I'm not sure that it's as efficient use of funds.
And
I could try to answer too. There's an administrative efficiency in the tax credit programs. If these went out as grants, we'd need about 3 more Caitlins to administer the program because they come with a lot of contractual obligations that have to be followed through. So it is administratively efficient. I think discounting on them is pretty minimal. If they were to flip to a grant, you would pay as much or more in additional staff required to administer the program.
So can you describe that more? I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, Caitlin can talk about it too. We offered, Caitlin also administers barn and historic preservation grants. And there's a whole grant administration back end to that. that takes a lot of time and energy to administer. This is pretty quick. This is administratively efficient. The applicants don't earn the credit until the project is done. The state has to inspect the property for code compliance. And once that is done, the credit, is released. And in many instances, like as Caitlin mentioned, the taxpayer takes it on his own tax bill, or he sells it to a third party, a bank or insurance company. Caitlin wouldn't be able to administer $3 million in grants singly and do 2 other grant programs.
So if it comes at the end of the project, isn't the point that you need the cash to do the project?
Absolutely. What most of these projects need is to look bankable. And banks do not look favorably on these projects until somebody has made an investment in them. So our paper investment, allocating a tax credit to these projects, makes the bank look at a project they wouldn't fund and look at them differently. They would greenlight a project they otherwise wouldn't, because they know that if they provide them the financing on this project and the project is completed, they can earn that credit in the end. So it does make the project happen.
Can I just add to that, Chris? This is another thing that's sort of different between the tax credit and the grant program. With a lot of our grants, which are reimbursement grants, applicants need to have the money up front. They need to have matching money to go ahead and do the project. With this tax credit program, an applicant that is successful that receives a tax credit award can take their award letter to a lending institution to get money for their project in the form of a short-term construction loan up front. And then they do the project knowing that they'll use that tax credit to sort of pay off the loan at the completion of the project. So it's one of the few mechanisms that they have to sort of infuse money into the project at the beginning, which is why I think this program is a popular sort of first stop for some of these big complex projects, to kind of get buy-in from other funders to help them do these big and important projects.
Okay. So Laura, no, Caitlin, you can keep going. All right.
Great. I just had this one last slide, which is just another way to look at the same thing I was just talking about. This is showing funding demand over the past 10 years. As you can see, the cap in the blue has increased over the past 10 years, but the demand has continued to keep pace with that. And so again, we're still struggling to fund some really good projects that come to us each year because of the cap that we currently have in the funding. And with that, unless there's another question about that, I'm going to let Chris take it home here.
I'm going to just do one more slide. A lot of my summer and fall was spent serving on the Vermont Climate Council. And I just want to kind of make a nexus between this investment that you're considering in our downtowns and village centers and related back to the investments we need to make our communities more resilient and reduce emissions related to cars. Cars and traveling to work and to school are one of the largest sources of emission in the state. And obviously, if we create more housing opportunities closer to where we live, work, and shop, we can make a significant bite in our emissions. We also can strengthen the vitality of our community and improve our quality of life. So that is why we want to be able to make an investment in the housing that supports the downtowns and village centers. The strong and vital housing in and around the centers is one way to kind of short circuit the Amazon effect that many of our communities are feeling. The people who live in those communities are the ones who are going to shop in the downtowns and the ones who are going to support that local business. So that's why we would like to be able to support housing quality and create more housing opportunities in and around our centers. The other change I wanted to mention is the flood resilience tax credit. Both these recommendations, the NDA credits and the flood mitigation credit, were recommended in the climate action plan. Many of our coastal communities are already making investments now to ensure that when floods happen, people can bounce back quickly from these events. Vermont is not, and we're hoping this incentive will get more communities to consider, or more, property owners to consider opportunities to make flood improvements to buildings. So when the next flood does hit, people in houses, people in downtown places can bounce back more quickly. I have a few more slides, but I think I'm just going to stop there because in the interest of time, and then see if the committee has any more questions.
Okay. So.
I have one more thing to add. I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
All of these provisions have been supported by the Senate in several bills. I think we've been working at these same provisions since 2020. And I want to thank, Chair Sorokin for his staunch support of these bills and this committee for their support. You've passed them before, and I do hope, because our downtowns have such needs and housing is so critical, I think, to our economy. I hope this is the year we can do it. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions at this point, Chris or Caitlin? Or that looks familiar. Okay, so I'm going to go up Senator Bray.
Yeah, Mr. Cochran or Ms. Corrigan, can you remind me of the requirements for winning the village center designation? Do you have to have permanent zoning and planning bylaws, or is that not yet a requirement?
Yeah, Chris Cochran here. For village center designation, it is the easiest designation we have of the 5 that you saw. The community, to qualify for the designation, has to have an adopted town plan. They have to identify the village area that they would like to designate in that town plan. But zoning is not a prerequisite for the benefits. The major benefit of the village center designation is the tax credits, which improves existing buildings only.
Thank you.
What was that last piece? The major benefit is for what?
The major benefit of the downtown and village center, but in the villages, is the tax credits to improve existing buildings. They don't get any additional benefit. They get priority consideration for other agency grants, but the major benefit is the tax credit to improve buildings.
And do you have a chart that shows the amount of town? I know you gave the numbers, but I don't know how recent the numbers are in terms of the increase in all these designations of the number of towns that are now competing for these grants.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. Villages are the biggest, our growth designation. I can send it to you, Senator. I want to say in the past 5 years, we've seen, I want to say a 30% increase in the number of villages designated off the top of my head, but I'll get you that information and send it to you or Faith.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to move on to Benjamin Doyle, Preservation Trust.
Madam Chair, I think Patrick Titterton is trying to
Patrick,
say
are you
something.
trying to get in?
Sorry, I was just going to make a quick comment. While we're on the topic of the Downtown and Village tax credit program, JFO did review this program in the tax expenditure review report. So if you want any further background information, that could be a good place to go do a little reading.
That's right. That was last year.
Yeah, it was the 2021 report.
Yeah, I would add that JFO's report was favorable about the program at the high level, saying it was meeting its revitalization goals in communities and was spreading the benefits, distributing the benefits fairly well around the entire state.
Yeah, we did that maybe 2 years ago. Was that the last major tax?
Last year, it was a deep dive report. It looks like Graham is on this call. He wrote the report.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think before we get into, we're going to finish the testimony, then we can argue whether or not they're worth it.
Can I
Senator
ask
Hardy,
one
yeah.
question before we lose these guys? On your slide on the designations, the 260 designations, you might have already answered this, but growth centers, how are you defining growth centers?
Well, in statute, of course, no. Growth centers, there's not a lot of them. Our focus is for the tax credits is the downtown and village centers. Growth centers are 20-year areas around the community, and they have to go through a very difficult and extensive process to designate a larger area for potential future growth. We only have 6 of them in the state. And because the application process is so difficult, I don't anticipate us getting any more. They are not eligible for tax credits.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Doyle.
Thank you so much, Senator Cummings, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee. Thank you for your time. My name's Ben Doyle. I'm the president of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. I suspect that many of you knew my predecessor, Paul Brune, who was president of the trust for 40 years and an incredible champion for rural communities in Vermont. I previously was the assistant state director at USDA Rural Development, which is a federal agency that works to increase the economic vitality of rural America. At the Preservation Trust of Vermont, our mission is to build community through the preservation and revitalization of Vermont's historic buildings, villages, and downtowns. Another way to really say that is that we try to help Vermont communities save the places and spaces, the gathering places that they love. And the Preservation Trust has been doing this work for over 40 years. Last year, we worked on 281 separate preservation projects in 144 different communities. So chances are we help people work on a building in your community. We serve as a close friend to communities in their work, whether it's been providing seed funding for structural assessments of historic buildings, fundraising help, or implementation funding. But the key to everything that we do is about building community. And that's why supporting rural villages and downtowns is really the keystone of our work. Downtowns and villages are where commerce, community, and culture intersect. They're where relationships, not transactions, take place. They're where we connect person to person, whether making a purchase from a local retailer, or dining out, or connecting with friends and neighbors at a concert in the park. Villages and downtowns are the places where we strengthen our social ties and build community. They are the engine for creating and preserving local wealth. It's for these reasons that the Preservation Trust of Vermont has always championed the Downtown and Village Tax Credit Program, and why I'm happy to speak in support of it today. I really appreciated the questions and conversations that I heard before my testimony. And I just want to acknowledge that we really recognize that the increase in the program's cap and the proposed expansion into neighborhood development areas is a significant change. But we also recognize that this is a critical moment in Vermont for additional investments for the following reasons. Number one, the Village and Downtown Tax Credit Program is one of the simplest and most effective tools for public investment in villages and downtowns, and is often a funding source that is leveraged by other funders. I can tell you in my time at USDA Rural Development, we often worked in small communities on projects that where a financing stack on a rehabilitation project was really extensive. For example, the East Calais Community Trust, the general store that you folks were referring to, that particular project right now, which is ongoing, I believe at this point has 11 different funding sources in it, including a significant grant from the Preservation Trust for $100,000 for the project. It has Northern Borders Regional Commission funding in the project. It has federal tax credits in the project. None of those funds could be leveraged without the Village and Downtown Tax Credit Program, in my opinion. And I should also say, most significantly, it has incredible support from the local community that has raised philanthropic dollars to help make that project move forward. But as Caitlin referenced, it's the tax credit program that is often the first money allocated in the door that makes all those other funding sources more accessible. So that was reason number one. Second, I would say that it's so important to invest in this program because the history of the program shows that it is effective in supporting projects in our most rural or economically challenged communities. According to the GFO report that was just referenced, last year that measured the efficacy of the program, since 2007, the majority of credits have been awarded to projects located in parts of the state where economic growth has been at or below the average for the state as the whole. Of the roughly $28 million in credits awarded since the inception of the program, 18.3 million, or 65%, has been awarded to projects in municipalities located in counties with below average GDP. I think that that's just really critical to remember. Because this program is accessible, communities that don't necessarily have access to other funding sources and are facing significant economic challenges do have access to this one. And in fact, that's the majority of where the funding goes. And then third, and I think Senator Pearson, I hope maybe tries to answer some of your questions about why the increase now. I would say perhaps the most compelling reason for increasing the support of the program is the existing housing crisis and the potential for future in-migration to Vermont. I firmly believe that in the coming years, we will see an increase in the number of people coming to Vermont, either by choice or by circumstance. As broadband availability increases, allowing people to work remotely in rural areas, and factors like climate change or COVID make urban life less attractive, people will come here. The question is, where will they go? What kind of community will they encounter? Clearly, we need more housing, all types of housing. And as we meet this challenge, it is important to incentivize new Vermonters to settle in existing development patterns to prevent the kind of sprawl that places excessive burdens on municipal services, adversely impacts our climate, and fundamentally undermines the sense of place and community that makes Vermont unique. An increase in the cap and the expansion into neighborhood development areas will ensure that our downtowns and villages can respond, can continue to be revitalized, and that additional income-producing residential properties surrounding the core are brought online, fostering vibrant, accessible, sustainable communities. If I could provide a personal example, if you'll forgive me, I grew up in a small town in the Northeast Kingdom. My family owned and operated a used bookstore in Lindenville for over 30 years. Nobody got rich, but the store weathered the rise of Barnes & Noble. It survived Borders. It survived Amazon. It's still going strong. When I was a kid, and I'm not that old, downtown Lindenville had 2 banks, a hardware store, 2 grocery stores, a clothing shop, a 5 and dime store, a drugstore with a soda fountain, a factory that made taps and dyes, and another factory that made bag bomb. Many of those downtown businesses have closed or relocated to the outskirts of town on Route 5. Lindenville is a wonderful and vibrant community with great local leadership, but it's important to acknowledge that these changes have placed stress on the sense of community and place that once existed. Community champions in Lindenville are working hard on revitalization efforts, whether it's by leveraging the emerging recreational economy or rehabilitating the historic built landscape. The tax credit program is a key tool in these efforts, as evidenced by the adaptive reuse of the bag bomb factory I referenced. With the help of 2 separate tax credit awards, what was a shuttered building in the heart of downtown now houses a first-floor restaurant and a thriving co-working space above. The Darling Inn, which is in downtown Lindenville, is affordable senior housing on Main Street, and that too benefited from the tax credit program that helped make other funding, including USDA funding, available. If you continue down Route 5, past the buildings that have relocated outside of town, and get to St. Johnsbury, it's incredible to see the impact. It's easy to see the incredible impact of this program, whether on the New Avenue project that Caitlin referenced that utilized the tax credit program to rehabilitate 40 affordable apartments, the Landry block on Railroad Street, which the program helped save after a fire and has now doubled in value on the grand list, or in the historic Ide Mill, which was threatened for demolition, but now is in the process of being rehabilitated by an industrial hemp processing company. These are examples of successful public and private investment that all of Vermont's rural communities should be able to take advantage of. In closing, Vermont in the coming years is going to experience a profound change. At the Preservation Trust of Vermont, we try to preserve historic buildings, but what we're really trying to do is preserve an equitable future for Vermont, a Vermont that thrives. And, I can just tell you, as someone who's working with rural communities every day across the state, this program is just such a critical tool, and it's one of the ones that communities most value. And so I appreciate your consideration of the increase in the expansion in the NDA areas, and I appreciate your time and leadership. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Doyle? I'll ask you, it's probably one for Chris or Caitlin. Does anyone monitor new businesses going in, their survival rate? I think the death rate for small business is about 50%. As we're revitalizing, are we watching the stability of those downtown areas?
I guess the short answer is no. The goal of the program is really to, repair the building and bring it up to code to make sure that it is a usable and serviceable space. Downtowns are a place of constant churn. What was built in the 1880s or 1850s as one thing becomes something else. So I think that, it is a natural cycle to see a lot of change and turnover. But what we want to make sure is that the buildings are up to code and safe and accessible so people can use them. So if we do lose a business, the space is turnkey and somebody can come in very, very quickly.
Okay, that's what I'm wondering is, are we monitoring? We've got nice buildings, they're all up to code. Are we monitoring that they're up to code buildings that have a business in them, or are they up to code buildings that are vacant?
And, a big part of making sure that we've got a good retail mix and vibrancy in the community is our partnership with the 23 downtown organizations. It is their job when somebody wants to get out of business to make sure that they have a new business coming into that space. They do incredible work, and they've been super helpful to many of our communities, helping our small businesses fill out all the PPP credit, paperwork and everything to make sure that we've lost a lot of businesses due to the pandemic, but they've been playing an important role ensuring that our key anchor businesses do remain on the landscape.
Okay. Senator Saraki.
I probably should have asked this question of my own committee, but the division of the $5 million, well, let me back up and say, I was first approached about an increase a few years ago by Chris and a bunch of other people. And my first response was, because they wanted to expand into neighborhood development areas. I said, well, aren't you going to dilute the money that's available for downtowns? And he said, good point, but we're also trying to get the governor to expand the overall cap. So we got that permission in the governor's budget, and off we went. But this bill says $5 million cap, but it says up to $1 million can be used for neighborhood development areas. And that is in part a political response to what the House did with this proposal last year. We supported in this committee 4.75, and the House struggled a little bit with it, but they were thinking that they would do the neighborhood development area as a pilot project, which we did in this bill for 5 years. And we carved out only a certain amount of money for neighborhood development areas out of that 5 million, 1 million out of 5. Is that an appropriate level, do you think, given what you expect the demand to be from neighborhood development areas?
Chris Cochran, I think I liked how it was, how you structured it. It says up to $1 million.
Right.
Right now, we don't have a ton of neighborhood development areas. We do expect a lot more are in the pipeline, especially with the investment in the Bylaw Modernization grants that will help more communities achieve that designation. But the way it's characterized, it's up to $1 million. So if that money is not spent, the balance of the money will go into our downtowns and village centers.
But it has a cap with the idea of not diluting the downtown program.
That's correct.
Michael, you need to remember this. So if there aren't any questions from Mr. Doyle, I'm going on to Laura Collins. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Maura Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and I won't be nearly as eloquent as Ben was, but I would be happy to jump around your bill to the sections that VHFA administers or touches that have an impact on tax expenditures, if that's okay.
Expenditures is what we're looking at.
Okay. Section 7 does touch the VHFA down payment assistance tax credit, but since there is no fiscal impact and there's no expansion of that tax credit and no new liability to the state, I don't know if you wanted me to speak to your earlier question, Senator Cummings, about the definition of first generation home buyer, or since there's no financial impact, do you want me to move on to the other credits?
It's just, I was wondering, do you need authority to set that by rule? I mean, my great grandfather owned a farm, but no one for the last 2 or 3 generations, or is it just your parents didn't own a house?
It's just your parents. This is modeled after a piece of federal legislation that Congress has introduced but not yet passed, called the Down Payment Toward Equity Act. And in that legislation, there is a definition of first-time home buyer, first-generation home buyer, and it's been VHFA's intent over the years. Legislators have talked to us about if there's a way that we could serve this population, and VHFA is always intended to mirror that language, but it's not in this bill, as you pointed out. The first generation, the first-time home buyer means someone who hasn't owned a home in the last 3 years, and a first-generation home buyer is someone whose parents or guardians never owned a home during that buyer's lifetime when they were living with them. And same with, that would have to apply to a spouse as well if, so if it was 2 borrowers, it would be to both of them. There are some carve-outs that individuals who lived in foster care could still qualify as a first-generation home buyer, regardless if their guardian, foster parent owned a home, as well as if your parent owned a home, but it was foreclosed on, or there was a short sale, then you would still qualify. My point is that there is a definition to it. And your example of 3 generations ago, someone owned property or a home, that they would still qualify as a first generation home buyer.
Okay, it's a pretty wide net.
Yes.
Okay.
I will point out that right now the bill does not have a cap on, it allows VHFA to take some of what I call a revolving loan fund and grant it out, which would reduce the amount of the revolving loan funds that are available in the future. Under my leadership, I would never want to reduce that loan fund dramatically, because I think that that's an important program that has served over 1,500 households and been wildly successful. And I'm not clear as to the legislature's intent about if there's a target or a cap that should be put in place so that we're all on the same page about how much of the revolving loan funds should be taken offline and granted. I would love at some point in this process, this session, I would love some guidance from the legislature on that.
Okay.
That's maybe not this committee though. So I just wanted to flag that.
Can I ask you a question?
Good question.
Thank you. So how much is the fund? What's the total amount of the fund? So, and do you have a recommendation for the amount that you would feel comfortable for these grants?
So the fund is still growing because every year we can sell more tax credits, and we have the authority to do that through fiscal year 2026. And in the end, it will be about $10 million of lendable proceeds in circulation. I do not know what the universe of the need is, or I'm sorry, not the need. I don't know what the universe of demand would be. I don't know how many first generation home buyers there are in Vermont. I've never known a program or a mortgage application process to ever ask about your parents' housing status when applying for a loan. And so I don't know how much to size this to. And I would be happy to start small and report back in a year or something like that. But until we roll out a program, I don't know that I could size it in terms of need. But I can say, I mean, I could give you some stats on the success of the loan program, but having this grant funding would be really, really helpful because this would get at the needs that a lot of legislators have called for, which would be to provide some equity and wealth transfer to households who have historically not had access to that ability to build up that that wealth because of generational homeownership that has been passed on.
Okay. Senator Sorokin, I'm watching the time,
Okay, I'm just
so.
trying to say, so we purposely gave more of the authority because we had so many unanswered questions and the discretion, there's a lot of discretion in this program already. She's raised the amount of money as she saw the applications coming. So she didn't know how many first generation home buyers were. So I said, well, monitor and use your discretion and report back and, you know, maybe we'll give you more guidance, but we set it up purposely to give her that discretion.
Is there a report in the bill though, or is it just an informal report back?
I guess it would be more info. I don't think there's a formal report, but we see more a lot.
Yes, you do see more.
Wondering if something were to unfortunately happen to Maura, would we?
They can put it in the department and she's gone.
Okay,
I have no, I mean, that's fine, something like that.
we're gonna have to move on because we will do our final discussion as to what we want to do here. And so Mara, I'm gonna have you finish and then
So
we'll have Patrick to go through.
So Section 8 speaks to manufactured home improvement and replacement. There is some money, appropriated money that I'm not going to speak to, but there is an expansion of the manufactured home tax credit program that VHFA administers. It's the same kind of tax credits that fund the DPA program, the down payment assistance program I just spoke to. This is a statewide program that provides a silent second mortgage to help cover down payment assistance for replacing inefficient manufactured homes with Energy Star rated manufactured homes or net zero energy modular homes. It's been very successful. It's this is one where the Champlain Housing Trust administers this across the state. There's been over 250 homes impacted with this program, with touching over 530 people. These homes, 250 homes, have been either purchased or replaced. The average income of people served is $45,000. 26% of the residents in these homes are either elderly or disabled. And CHT gets over 100 applications a year, but really through this program as funded now is serving, I think it's like 30 or 35 homes a year. And so the governor, the housing advocates, everyone has long been supportive of this credit increase. It was proposed last year. I think you saw it last week, and another bill that was carried over from last year. And I know Patrick has been working on he has a fiscal impact note in his report that says because these are 5-year tax credits, it takes a couple of years for the full impact of to hit the state's balance sheet. And once we get to that 5th year, so the state is feeling the entire impact of that credit, it will be $1.25 million a year in lost revenue to the state. Are there questions about that program? This is one where I think Patrick's going next, but I would just point to, there's a chart right toward the end of his report that's on your committee's website that explains how this 5-year tax credit is different than the downtown tax credit. The downtown tax credit's a 1-year credit. You sell the credit, you get the money that year. They don't have this same complication to explain, but ours is a 5-year tax credit, which means the $250,000 increase means that the state is foregoing $250,000 a year for 5 years. And so we are able to take all of that, sell those credits today, get the full amount of the value of that, and put that into use to buy up these manufactured homes and have the impact today in the marketplace. But it's over time that banks are writing off $250,000 each year, equally over 5 years.
Okay, but it doesn't end after 5 years.
Correct. So in year 6, that tax credit would have ended, but there's new tax credits that we're selling. So that's why I say by the 6th year, the 5th year, that is where the state has the full impact of the credit, and it will stay at that level forever forward.
Okay,
Unless you sunset this program, but that's not being proposed. So this will stay in effect at the 1.25 million.
okay. All right. Anything else that you need us to hear?
VHFA is very supportive of so many sections of this bill. There is a $15 million appropriation for a missing middle home construction program, and there are other language fixes and wonderful things in the permitting and the rest of this bill. But I think since you're focused on tax credits, I think those are the only sections you want to hear about today.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mara? All right, if not, I'm going to go to Patrick. And Patrick, you're going to tell us what this is all going to cost.
That's right. So Pat Ditterton, Joint Fiscal Office for the record. I should share my screen so you can look at this table. Can you see my screen?
You're going to make it about 4 times bigger though.
I got this little,
We can see
there we
it.
go. There we go.
There
How's
you go.
that?
That's good. That is great.
All right, so let's hop right down to the this table here. So this should help you with your tally sheet. On the top here, we have the appropriation. So in fiscal year 22, that 5 million is coming out of that total of 15 million that's going to the missing middle program. And then in fiscal year 23, that includes the additional, like the leftover 10 million in that program, and then the 5 million for the manufactured home relocation program. These general fund appropriations are for the municipal bylaw grants. And then these $200,000 in appropriations, that's coming out of the professional regulatory fund, which is for OPR to hire 1 person to administer and 1 person to enforce that new contractor registry. And so skipping ahead to tax expenditures, which I know you care more about. No impact in fiscal in this year, but starting next year, you'll see that $2 million expansion of the downtown tax credit, threshold increasing. So that's a 2 million there. It also includes in fiscal year 23 that affordable housing tax credit, which you can see here. So this chart shows that sort of tailed effect that Maura was just talking about. And so in year 1, it's the 250 expansion, but over time, over 5 years, it'll go up to that 1.25 million. There is a little bit of expected revenue in this bill, and that pertains to the professional regulatory fund, which is for the contractor registries. We estimate, so this is a biennial renewal process. And so, this is sort of the average, the 1-year average over 2 years that we would expect the fund to be bringing in registration fees. So 125,000 in fiscal year 23, and then by 27, that would be up to 340,000 annually. And so bottom line of all those revenues and tax expenditures. So in fiscal year 23, we'd expect a tax expenditure of a net tax expenditure of 2.1 million, and because of the affordable housing tax credit, that would expand to about 2.9 million in fiscal year 27.
Okay, and Patrick, that 2 million in the downtown and village tax credit, that's an additional 2 million because we're already foregoing 3. So
That's
the
right.
total cost would be 5 million,
That's right. So this is showing the net impact.
right?
Right,
And
that's in the base, right?
Yeah, and if I'm remembering, 2019, we were still at somewhere around 2 million, and we upped it to 3.
2.6 and 19.
It was a 2.6, okay. We upped it to 3, and now we're going to 5 is the request. Okay, thank you, I think. All right. Any questions on this one? All right, thank you. Committee, on my thing, I think we were scheduled for a break. No, we are not. Too bad. We've been through it. This is crunch week.
Can I ask you just a quick
Yeah.
thing of Michael? The manufactured housing tax credit, that's exactly what we passed last year or what we discussed in here last year, right? That the amount seemed the
We
same.
passed that in S101. Senate did not pass this one. They came back with a proposal in that
It's in
mansion tax.
435.
They agreed with that part of our bill.
Yeah, so they stuck in 435.
Got it, okay.
Still sitting there. Okay, so we're going on to 181. Maybe we could, we have break at 3:30, so we're really good. This is the authorizing miscellaneous regulatory authority. And the one area we were looking at, it authorized all towns to do a local option tax with the same vote and limitations that towns have. And is Commissioner Bolio with us, Faith?
Commissioner Bolio is going to be with us, but I thought you were going to discuss the last bill you were on, so I'm just contacting them now.
I'm trying to get caught up here. So if we can get him.
I've invited, they both know that and they're waiting. They just aren't
Okay.
on Zoom.
The big question is the $2 million, I think, increase in the downtown tax credit. All I can tell you is I spent lunchtime with the money chairs talking about how we may need to raise revenue this year. I know that's a stretch, and next year we're back to where the alligator thing with the revenues just not keeping up with expenses.
We raised
The
a little bit.
alligator, yes. But
I think that's right.
we're all on a spending spree, and the appropriations people
Yes. I mean,
are struggling. So we just need to be cognizant of that. On the other hand, I'd like to get these bills out because they do have to go to a folks. And it is Wednesday. So,
Buy some alligator repellent.
yes. Start legalizing shoes,
Legalizing shoes?
alligator. You could buy those little pocketbooks with the heads on them. in the
Senator
50s.
Cummings?
Yes, here,
Commissioner,
and Commissioner is with us.
that's right.
All right, Commissioner Bolio. I saw you. There you are.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon. We are looking at S181, and the one thing that seems to be in our purview is allowing all towns to do a local option tax under the same, they pay you a fee to administer. But I just know when I fill out my sales tax now, there's a list of towns I have to check off. Is this going to give you any? I don't know how many of the smaller towns might do it. There was a question about Whether or not that's gonna give you an issue in tax forms, like 3 extra pages. And I think there was also a question about cannabis and how, I guess if you do a local sales tax, you can,
Yeah, that would apply to
it
cannabis.
would apply to
Part of
cannabis.
my question was, could you do it for just that, sort of a surgical local option tax?
And I think we were told no by Tucker, but we'll look to have that confirmed.
Yeah, happy to speak to all of that. For the record, Craig Bolio, Tax Commissioner. And I have a few comments today to speak to. And as you prefaced, Madam Chair, I'm really only going to be speaking to Section 7 of the bill, which deals with, as you described, allowing towns to adopt a local option tax on a vote without coming to the legislature for approval. So the administration's preference on this is to retain the requirement for most towns to come to the legislature requesting permission for that, in order to keep both, any future legislature and governors in the decision-making process. I acknowledge they are locally voted decisions, but they do have impacts, I think, for state policy considerations and state agencies, right? As this committee well knows, my department must collect the local option tax remittance from local businesses and distribute it to the municipalities. So, as more towns come on board, that has implications for my department's budget and workloads, as well as usually requiring some kind of recalibration of the per return fee, which is $5.96, and which frankly has been a challenge to get the legislature to adjust it downward, despite it almost certainly being too high at this point with the volume of local option transactions we have. Local option taxes can also have theoretically an impact on state level policy decisions in that, they decrease state level or statewide taxing capacity when additional taxes are levied on local communities, right? Like most taxpayers, I think outside of this committee or other tax nerds like me, probably don't distinguish between the normal 6% sales tax and the 1% local option tax, right? A lot of people are just going to look at it as a 7% sales tax. So as more localities have a 7% sales tax, it diminishes the ability for the state to ever change that rate if they want. And the state sales tax, obviously, is a statewide tax. It goes to fund education around the state. The state has an interest, I think, in knowing whether a lot of new towns are going to move to 7%, right? And just because the legislature has, to my knowledge, has never denied one of these requests before, doesn't mean a future legislature won't make a different call or want to have a bigger discussion if we ended up with, not that this has happened in the past, but say 10, 15 towns want to enact law on one town meeting day. That's going to have an impact on my department that might have a wider policy impact that the legislature wants to have a bigger discussion about it. I want to be clear, I don't say any of this as a judgment on local option taxes in general. But just more to the point of, I would encourage the state legislature to stay involved in that process for towns. I think maybe the last thing that I would say before pausing is that, if the committee is intent on passing the bill as is today revokes some really important language, some really important language to be able to actually manage administration of the local option taxes at the tax department. So currently in law, any town that's considering this must notify my department with at least 90 days notice. And it must begin on the first day of a calendar quarter with at least 90 days notice. And I believe that the language as written today repeals that. And that's critically important because without that provision, my department doesn't have time to update our forms, doesn't have time to notify taxpayers, and businesses don't have time to update their point of sale systems to begin collecting. But again, I think the broader point I would make is to have a more thoughtful discussion before removing the legislature and therefore as well governors out of the decision-making process on this.
Okay, so your basic is you prefer we not do it, just so that we can have some control over who does it and impact on the state. But if we decide to go forward, at least require that you get the 90-day notice on the first quarter so that you can get all the forms and everything updated and be ready to go. And local businesses can get their hardware updated. Okay, committee, questions for Commissioner Bolio? Senator Brock.
This is a related question because we're on the subject of local option taxes at this point. Commissioner Bolio, I know that you're aware that I came to you some time ago to talk about a situation that I became aware of in which a particular company was charging the 1% local option tax, but they were not in a municipality that allowed the 1% sales tax, additional local option tax to be charged. They have since corrected that and are now charging the 6% that they should. But if we believe that for the 5 years that this happened, that they were doing so, they collected, my estimate is somewhere around $500,000 of taxes from Vermont taxpayers to which they were not entitled. I know there's a mechanism that the department has right now that allows someone who overpaid taxes to the state to get a recovery back, but that's for the business itself. There is no formal mechanism, at least that I'm aware of, that allows the individual taxpayer who overpaid to get it back. And this particular business does not seem to be active in trying to pay back the overtaxation to the people who paid it. Should there be some mechanism, whether it be in this bill because we're dealing with it or in some other vehicle, that allows for an individual taxpayer who overpaid a tax that they weren't entitled to pay, such as a local option tax, to recover that money from the department as opposed to from the individual taxpayer who may in fact have gotten the money back but not given it to the person who paid it?
Yeah, so let me speak to a couple of elements of that, and I think I'll be able to happily clarify something in my comments as well. So the first provision that matters is that if a business collects sales tax, whether or not it's the exact right amount, they must remit it to the department. Additionally, the department doesn't have authority to refund money to a business without the business demonstrating that it was overpaid and not collected from customers, such as maybe they sent us a check for the wrong amount and it wasn't actually what they collected. But if they are looking for a refund of monies collected, they must demonstrate a plan to refund it to the customers that it was collected from, right? Because sales tax is a tax on the customer, but it is collected by the business. Though I would happily clarify, the existing mechanisms that we have to request a refund of taxes inappropriately paid are applicable to individuals as well as businesses. My memory of the situation at hand, Senator, is that the instructions on our form are not crystal clear for that. They appear to imply that it's only available to businesses, but it is available to both. So I'm happy to follow up on that issue and see if we've made any progress at the department level in clarifying that. But both businesses who have overpaid, again, if it's going to a business, they would need to demonstrate that it would be refunded to the customers. But the customers themselves, if they recognize have been overcharged, can come and request that refund directly from the department.
Yeah, presumably there's a change in the form and so on and so forth that would allow them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the form doesn't necessarily have to change to allow them to do that. If they submitted it today, we would accept it. I think the challenge on the form is that it was not clear that that was allowed. So I'm looking to make it clear that it is allowed. It's allowed. Under statute.
The other challenge that I'm trying to get at, though, is that the individual who was overcharged probably over this 5-year period, the hundreds of individuals who were overcharged don't know that they were overcharged. Now, you mentioned that it's up to the business, if there was such an overcharge, to then refund the money to the individuals who paid it. Is there any mechanism for ensuring that that gets done?
Well, I'm not sure that I would say that it is the responsibility of the business, right? Because the individual does have an opportunity to get the refund directly. I would say businesses may feel an obligation in that sense to do it. And if we were to refund the money to them again, they would have to demonstrate that they would get it back to customers. I mean, I think what you've highlighted is a logistical challenge, right? For individual customers in that situation, the juice may not be worth the squeeze, so to speak, to come fill out a form to the department to get what may be pennies or a small amount back. So I recognize that challenge, and I don't have a great solution for that, right? I mean, we're barred by a number of of issues, most foundationally disclosure issues, to be able to communicate with customers of businesses if we feel like there has been an overcharge. And so I understand the challenge of how does a customer recognize that that might have happened, and then how does the department aid in that scenario? It's a pretty challenging logistical issue, and I don't have a great solution for you, but I would say that the mechanism does exist today should taxpayers have awareness of it and a willingness to engage with it.
I think we ran into this during the bark mulch and other issues where technically the customer owed the tax, but the business had to pay it, and then it was up to them to go back and say, by the way, I should have taxed you. And I think the business swallowed it in that point. So this is interesting, but we have about 4 bills that need to go to approps, and it's Wednesday. So we need to get some of them out of here. Senator Hardy, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question on the local option tax. Commissioner, thanks for being with us. What I was told yesterday was that essentially this provision is under current law, only quote unquote gold towns can do a local option tax without permission, and that this section 7 of the bill would make it so all the towns have the same sort of availability of a local option tax as the gold towns. Is that your reading of it too?
Yes, that is my reading of it. I think that I don't know the exact number that had qualified under the original Act 60. I think it was more than I thought, maybe like 60 or 80 or something like that. But there are a list of towns as laid out in current statute that don't require the permission of the legislature to do it.
Right,
So
and it's this sort of kooky thing with late 1990s dates in there, and if you did certain things. But so your point about the 90-day notice is a good one, but the way that it's drafted in current law, if we were just to preserve that little section, I don't think it would make sense on its own. So if we were to pass this through as it is, but we would wanted to grant you the 90-day notice or whatever other notification you might need, do you have suggested language? Because I think it might be cleaner to just have new language rather than trying to preserve this one partial sentence.
Yeah, again, if the committee is interested in moving this, we'd be happy to work with Ledge Council and try to find something for that piece for the notification. Okay.
So committee, I don't know that we're going to get a break, but we've got to get some of these out of here. So I'd like to start because we've got 239, which is another heavy and complicated bill coming up, the Medicaid supplemental insurance. 226, that's the downtown tax credits. We've passed the mobile home before, and that's 1.25 million. And then we've it's the $2 million increase in the downtown tax credits. And yeah, we've never met the demand, but it's essentially free money to a lot of projects, and we probably never will meet the demand. So on that one.
Just reading Graham's report on the program, it's pretty favorable.
Yes, it
We're
is.
expanding the breadth of the program as a policy matter. So, I mean, we've got tens and tens of millions in this bill in housing, and this is
Yes.
another 2 million that I think is pretty effective. Other than the jurisdictional issue, I've always felt kind of struck by what's the difference between a tax expenditure and an appropriation. And it's all part of the budget, and it's hard to understand from a legislative perspective why this committee or together these committees aren't looking at the whole package as to what money is put into housing as the best tool. This was our best judgment as to how to do it. And this committee did vote for 4.75 last year.
Yes. Right.
Can you remind me, is this a one-time tax credit, or is this creating an ongoing expenditure?
It's a cap in the statute. So if you didn't come back and change the cap next year, it would continue at $5 billion next year.
It's the same level, okay?
You could sunset it, I guess, but
And I think folks removed that last year. Just because it's revenue we are presently getting that we will forego getting next year. And every year thereafter unless we change it. So
and housing is a pretty important issue this year.
it is.
It's been a pretty important issue every year I've ever been here. But it's always been, woe is us, short supply.
It is, but you go to any town and try and build it, and it's not easy. I can show you a beautiful field that should have housing that's walking distance to downtown. Straight line, sidewalks, paved, bike path. You can't put housing in that in this town.
Because
It's out Berry Street. Because the neighbors don't want it. They want open space. We just bought the Elks Club, which is not walking, well, maybe if you're 20, it's walking distance to downtown. But it, supposedly we might sell it, some of the land for housing, but it is not smart growth by any standard. It's a fair way out of town. So we've got a couple problems. It's not just money.
Sure.
So Senator Bray, you've got the floor.
So happy to, it's more discussion, but I think at this point, from everything I've learned, I would move that we report favorably. That's 226.
Okay, so we have a motion, we report 226 favorably. Further discussion.
Which one?
226,
The omnibus housing.
the omnibus housing.
Can I just ask Michael a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Because we're in discussion right now.
So the downtown tax credit though is not just for housing, right? It's for, because it could be for general stores or
It's not just
a
for
whole bunch of stuff, so.
but usually there's housing associated with it, but not always. It's not a requirement.
Is it, what did your committee talk about, maybe making it a requirement, at least for the short term, because housing is such a priority?
We did that, quite frankly, in a lot of areas in this bill.
Uh-huh.
This, because this had passed before.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, in both of our bills, economic, there's a bunch of reloads that didn't make it through the House, and this was sort of one of those. It has 250,000 more granted, but so we didn't. I would be open to talking more about that concept because it is consistent with what we did.
Mhm.
I think we'll hear from Chris Cochran that a lot of these projects are joint projects of development, like the pictures we saw of development of housing around it, and it's pretty hard to just do it for a housing only project or restrict the money to a housing only.
Right. I would be fine with this motion, but one thing is, since you guys are the chairs of the relevant committees, I need more assurances on the floodplain housing. I'm not comfortable with that. That's not in our jurisdiction. So if you have any more information that could make me more comfortable about building new things
Yeah,
in floodplains.
we can get you that, and I do know that those particular provisions were the result of a lot of stakeholder discussions, including the NRC
Uh-huh.
throughout the summer, and they agreed with it. I value their opinion, and there was consensus on that stuff. I asked the same question. Jeanette White asked the same question in caucus, and I followed up.
Uh-huh.
And, even her person down there that she trusts said, absolutely, because there are protections in the bill that it's not just open-ended construction to more floodplain areas. It's only floodplain areas that have restrictions or rules that govern them and permitting that govern them, and it allows for greater flexibility in the development if you include the land area that includes the floodplain.
It also requires that those restrictions be, I think, extended to other, I'm trying to think, there's a benefit to the rest of the town because they, by agreeing to that provision, they also have to do a higher level planning elsewhere. And I have to look at the bill to have the exact.
Well, we can have the conversation some other, because I know it's not this committee, but
Happy to.
yeah, and that, just before the floor, that's just one
But
thing
if
I'm
you
a little.
build to floodplain specifications, the coffee shop, Capitol Grounds, right on the river in Montpelier. In the Montpelier flood, they had been redone, and you notice you walk up about a
Yeah.
1-foot ramp, their main floor was dry, nobody's basement was dry. The Gary home right out here, just past the inn at Montpelier, it was flooded. Next door, the apartments, Pioneer Apartments, and the head of the housing said, I complained like crazy when I had to build the flood specs, but they remained dry and were not evacuated. So it's not a lot of difference. It's just when they did the rehab, they had to raise that first floor maybe a foot above the floodplain, and it worked.
Yeah, I'm just concerned as we have more and more flooding because of climate change, that our current specs can be good enough, so.
Yeah,
I mean, but
something.
it's,
So we have
one-
multiple times, all the people who do all the rules and they're, as well as the FEMA director, and they're all supportive of the
I
change.
mean, most of Vermont is in a floodplain.
the one other thing, the small other thing, Michael, was the report back on the first generation and whether you feel like we should put something in there just in case something happens. I always hate to have things that just depend on the trust of one person.
It's a pretty narrow area. If I were to go there, I'd like to make the report back to include more than that.
Yeah.
But I could certainly write a letter right now asking the HFA to make sure they give us an update. I don't think if we're just gonna focus on that, I think it's not worthy of the report section.
I don't think we know enough right now, say only
Well,
20% or something.
Right,
Might not
that's-
get any takers.
So don't, but in a year we might.
In a year, just, I mean, clearly we need to collect some more data on it, and that seems to be a theme everywhere, but, okay, thanks. Madam
Okay,
Chair.
so I have a motion, Senator McDonald.
On the flood issues, we had some testimony next door, Madam Chair, where it's one thing to take the Gary home and build it up a little bit higher, so that you don't flood the interior of the building, etc. It is a completely separate issue to build a new dwelling next door where there wasn't one before, because that increases the level of your flood.
Exactly.
And is it, the bill we have before us, does it permit additional buildings to be built in the floodplain that would raise the flood waters?
It does permit additional new housing to be built with certain requirements and restrictions, but it does permit new things to be built.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
So, obviously,
Said,
Natural Resources Committee had concerns.
I haven't seen, he left.
We were satisfied.
Oh, we didn't.
This is actually, remember what I said yesterday? I said you're gonna double down because you're gonna have the exact same sections tomorrow.
Yeah,
But I think the answer will give you, will satisfy you.
Okay. and we can do it another time. I just-
Okay, yes, because I have a motion, and we got any further discussion on our section of this bill, which are the downtown tax credits, using $1 million of the tax credit to go into the neighborhood development areas, which does focus on housing, at least $1 million worth.
Up to.
Up to $1 million, right. Further discussion on this? Motion is that we report the bill out favorably. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? I'm seeing that as 601, right? Okay. Now we can go on to 181, which is.
Do you want to order on
Yeah, I'm assuming it's you.
that? I was gonna suggest Senator Brock just to divide up, but there's nothing to report. So I'll do it.
Okay.
Just one part of the bill.
181.
Oh, right.
Yeah, are you sure you can? Contract registry.
Senator Cummings, this is Faith.
I saw what you're saying.
Okay, yes.
I just want to be sure the reporter, I think it's Senator Sorokin, brings the bill up to the Senate Secretary's office, please.
Yes, and the bill is in that top file cabinet, and I am gonna give you a 10-minute break.
Okay.
But I've got 181, which is essentially letting everyone. We just voted out 226 favorably, the housing bill.
Wow, that whopper.
Mm-hmm.
Could you add my affirmative vote to the mix,
I think we
please?
can. We have not reported it yet. Okay, we are now on 181, which is the local option tax. I'll say it makes me a little queasy, but
Yeah, I agree.
be consistent.
Could we do well, first of all, I think we should get the reporting language, the notification language in for the department. If we're gonna do the. local
Yes,
action
so we
taxes.
can do a straw poll and then we can get the notification.
Yeah,
If we're going there, if we're not going there, then it's another, we don't have to worry about it.
right, fair, yeah.
Okay, so committee, are we ready to just say any town that wants to can enact a local option, which would be rooms and meals, sales, or alcoholic beverages? You can't pick and well, you can pick and choose those three. You can't say bourbon and not gin. You can't go down. You can't say pubs and not hotels.
Kentucky or Tennessee?
No, we do Kentucky. Remember where your chair is from. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I found myself agreeing with the commissioner. But
I'm not seeing a
it's
lot.
not hard to do one, right?
Not when Montpelier was the first and I came here twice as mayor and it never got taken up. It was hard.
Right, it's hard for Barry for a while.
Yeah,
But that was with voters, actually.
that was with voters.
Anytime
It has
you
not
ask
been
to-
hard in this building.
Any town can ask to do it,
Yes,
it's just that the little towns can automatically do it.
Yeah, and they did. I mean, this was, we're saying, well, you know, you've got all these tourists and you can do a sales tax and most of them didn't. I don't know if any of them did. It's the small cities that are trying to support fire, police and ambulance and high
I
tax
mean,
rates.
most towns in Vermont don't have like rooms and meals and
Right.
things like that, they don't have restaurants and hotels and that.
Not enough to make it, yeah.
Yeah.
So. I'm seeing this as a no.
I would defer to you, Madam Chair, as a mayor.
No. As mayor, I have to say yes,
She's a senator, she's been senator longer than mayor.
much longer.
You don't want to be mayor again, do you?
No,
No, so.
no.
I mean, if it was thought to be onerous to get one, you know, I don't know.
Well, I think GovOps has if the people want it, the people should have it. But it is also part of the tax structure of the state. This argument came in that the sales tax was a state tax. The argument came in, well, you just took the property tax, which was a local tax.
Yeah.
So you should say, you
Yeah,
should
that's true.
share sales tax with us, but
We want to give them the property tax back.
That's right. We'll
No.
deal with that when we ship
Yeah.
it over to you.
Yeah.
So this is a center pit?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's gotta go to a pro, no, this one doesn't need to go to a pro, so we can
Did it
put this
did it
off.
come from another committee?
Yeah.
or-
Yeah, of ops.
Yeah, it's got a litany of GovOpsy things, including a weird thing, I think, but that's not subject to the tax.
Right.
So we're gonna kill a bill?
No, no, no.
No, no,
Strip
we
out a
just break
section.
that one section, we're
Okay.
not killing the bill. We've gotta get it out by Friday. Okay, I'm gonna give us a 10-minute break. That will put us 15 minutes behind, but we're gonna take on that Medicare supplemental insurance, and I think we might need a break then. Senator Sorokin.
Ending live stream.